This is the Outliers Podcast, episode 3, and we're here today with Carlos. And Carlos is the founder of a very, very cool place where change makers can meet called Good Ripple. And we're going to get into that today, Carlos. Do you want to just give us a bit of an introduction to yourself, Carlos? Tell us who you are, where you're from, and kind of how you ended up on this sustainability. I can't think of a good word for it. What's a good word for it?
Journey.
What is it when someone goes for when they go to Mecca? What do they call that? They go on their pilgrimage. It's like a pilgrimage almost for you.
Yeah, that's it. Well, thanks for having me here, Geoff. So my name's Carlos Terol, and I'm originally from Spain, from the Canary Islands. Beautiful place. If people haven't been there, totally recommend to go. And now I'm living in the UK, in a small town called Shrewsbury. If you're wondering how I ended up here, because it's quite a random place, it's because my girlfriend got a job in Birmingham. And somehow in Google we came across Shrewsbury, so we ended up here and loving it so far. Been in the UK for nearly 8 years now. Almost. I never get used to the British weather. Really happy here. And my sustainability pilgrimage. So I've been for the last 8 years or so, especially since I came to the UK, I've started developing sort of that interest about, I started with international development, more around like non-profits, charities, eradicating poverty. When I first came to the UK, I joined Engineers Without Borders because my background is in civil engineering. So I thought, well, that's the obvious one to join, right? So I joined them and I started running a local chapter for them. So we were running lots of events, doing some pretty cool stuff. So I started meeting lots of change makers like me and getting like really inspired when, hearing from other conversations. So I've always been involved mostly in my spare time with different charities, doing volunteering in different organizations. I've been leading a team of volunteers in Nepal. I went there for 3 months. I've been also a trustee for a local homeless charity in Reading. That's a bit my background. I've always been passionate about changing the world for the better in whichever way I could.
Brilliant. That's a very, very interesting and diverse background there, Carlos. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I just wanted to give a little insight for everybody who's probably wondering, how comes that guy from the northeast who runs a recycling / green refurbishment business kind of got in with Carlos? So I think just to kind of clear that off, I think there was a post by a professor, I can't remember the guy's name, you'll have to fill that in, and what the post was all about was the fact that there's evidence to say that non-profits could be classed as oppressed organisations. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I think,
it was a quote by Dan Pallotta, I think. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks for filling in the gaps for me. So I took a slight exception to that, and the reason that I did was, and Carlos and I ended up having a fairly good and healthy online debate about this. But I think one of the things that struck me is that I couldn't see the link between oppressed people and oppressed companies, and I kind of felt like it was slightly clickbaity to get people to read it and kind of join the cause, and then I think once I dived a little bit deeper into it, I think what I was expecting to see was kind of what came out. And I just wanted your view on it, Carlos. I felt like the people that stuck up for the oppression tag were the people who worked in the non-profits, and I kind of felt like, for me, that was kind of part of the problem, because if you want someone to join your cause, you almost want people from outside of that particular oppression to kind of join your cause and help you out. And I just felt like everyone who kind of was on the bandwagon with it were people who worked in the non-profit sector, and I just wondered whether there's room to do something slightly differently there in terms of not advertising. Advertising is the wrong word. That makes it sound quite sort of commercial, doesn't it? But I mean, how do you get people from outside of the non-profit sector to join that cause and to kind of fight that cause with people in the non-profit sector? Because I just felt like the way that was put across might actually turn people off it, and I think that was the kind of the debate we had, really. What was your view on that, Carlos?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting. And I think when it comes to this difficult, complex topics, it's always great to have a diverse range of views, right? Because, you know, we really need to discuss it. It's not like one answer has everything right? So we need to talk about it. In my view, and this is from somebody that, you know, I've been involved in the nonprofit sector mostly in different volunteering roles. But what I hear from all of the people I know in the volunteering and the nonprofit sector, and, you know, from tech talks and reading articles and stuff, you do feel once you're into that sector that you are oppressed. And obviously you mentioned this word might be a bit too much and a bit clickbaity, but the thing is that I've met many people who have gone from the nonprofit to the for-profit sector. And one of the main reasons is that in the nonprofit, they're not treated very well in terms of the wages they get, the benefits they get, because staff in the nonprofit sector, they're seen as a overhead, right? That's the bottom line. That you are an overhead. You are not just bringing value to the company. You are an overhead. So because we have to pay you, we pay less to the people who need it. And because of that whole mindset, it ends up with a lot of the staff in nonprofits being underpaid and being like, you know, they're working like crazy hours to help people. They're not really valued in that sense. So they end up just leaving because, you know, we have to pay bills and we have other commitments. So I think that way it's important to raise awareness about that oppression, if you want to call it, or, you know, pressure they have from mainly donors, but also just normal people. I've come across, you know, friends of mine that they say, well, I don't give to charity because out of the £10 I give them, 5 it's going to go to themselves and only another 5 is going to go to the people who need it. I'm like, but those 5 will be like really effective. It's not going to be effective. You just go and give £10 to somebody, right? So,
I totally get where you come from, and I think you know, just for the listeners out there that might be thinking, well, that was a very kind of harsh opinion on that, Geoff. I think what I tried to say as well is that, you know, I've got all of the respect in the world for anyone who puts the effort in and stays in the non-profit sector for entire careers sometimes. I mean, I think there were some people I talked to online who'd done it since way back when, and you know, you could tell they had real passion for it and things like that. And I don't think that was my argument, really. I think my argument was just like, you know, if you want to bring that subject to the forefront and get people behind you, maybe you should think about a different angle. And I think that's all that was. And I was kind of coming off the back of listening to some podcasts just on the same day about real things that I found were really impressive, and maybe we can get into that a bit, Carlos, and get your views on that. It was particularly about the cobalt mining in the Congo, which was the thing that I'd been reading that day about the mines over there for the electric car batteries and the supply chain and things like that. Maybe that's something we can kind of get into, because I think that is a very, very big topic that's only just now becoming a bit more publicised, and I think, you know, that could do with some airtime maybe. So you know, just to kind of cover that off, that's how Carlos and I met. and like all good you know, friendships and colleague friendships and things like that, you know, they always start with a good debate, I always say. So who knows what the future has for us. But okay, so we do have some other topics that I want to talk about as well today, and I think we kind of had a little chat about what we thought might be useful to talk about today. But I think one of the things that I think before we do that is we Zeke and I both signed up for Good Ripple, and I think it's amazing. I'm genuinely not just saying that. I think, you know, what a great thing that you're doing there, and I think if there's anywhere to start, that's a really good platform. And maybe we can post some things about that afterwards and tag and try and get some momentum going for that for the listeners maybe after this. But do you want to give us a kind of an introduction to Good Ripple, Carlos, and tell us all about that?
Yeah, of course. In a nutshell, Good Ripple, it's a platform to connect change makers, both locally and globally. And the reason we're trying to build this platform, which at the moment is it takes the form of a community of change makers. We started just 2.5 months ago. We're already over 400 people. So it seems that change makers want to connect with other change makers. But the reason I came up with it is that I've actually been struggling for the last 8 years to meet other change makers, particularly at a local level. because you end up meeting these change makers, but it takes a lot of effort to go to like lots of events, to join lots of charities, groups, you go to meetups, you know, and eventually you meet this one person that's a change maker and they live in the same street that you live. And it's like, that's mind blowing. Like, you live just across the road and you think, like I think, we have similar values. We both want to make a positive impact in the world. So suddenly you can start like going together to grab a coffee and brainstorm about ideas, going for a walk, have a meal together, bring more people. And, you know, the ripple and the good ripple effect of that is endless. And that's how we came up with that name. Because I believe that meeting, you know, inspiring people that you can connect at a personal level around you, the good ripple, it's incredible. You cannot measure it. You don't really know. You know, I've had so many conversations with change makers, and in a way, every single one of those conversations has led me to do this platform, right? But they just won't know that it was thanks to him in a, you know, 0.1%, but it is when you put all of that impact together is when you go on to do something big. And even if it's not big, you know, just starting local and doing whatever you can, that makes a difference, even if it just touches one person or, you know, one ecosystem. So that was a little bit how I came up with it, thinking, okay, why is it so difficult to meet other change makers? Why can't I just go on a map in an app and just see the change makers around me and start connecting with them and start brainstorming, setting up startups or, you know, joining causes together. So that's a little bit the background. So we are still in the very early stages. We're now into the validation stage. So I'm talking to lots of change makers to understand their pains, their issues, and if this platform was to come alive, what sort of features, what benefits would they want from it. So yeah, that's where we are. I'm quite happy to, you know, get help if anybody is also passionate and wants to reach out and collaborate in any form of degree. I'm quite open to that.
Another question that I've seen you pose as well on social media, which was really interesting, was because one of the things that I thought about afterwards, and I gave my answer and we had another chat about that, but one of the things I thought about was you didn't really say what your answer was, Carlos, and I thought it'd be interesting to ask you that today. So the question was, what kind of people are most likely to be change makers? And I think you said politicians, normal people, the wealthy, and there was one more in there. You might want to fill in that gap for me. And I think, what was the other one again?
Yeah, so the actual question was, who has the power to change the world?
That's right.
Yeah, so I said, I think big corporates, politicians,
yes, that's right.
Normal people, or others. So I just left it open.
So my question is, what's your view? What do you think?
My view is we the people. I'm quite a big believer on the power of people. I mean, if you put it into perspective, like even politicians are people, right? And even the big C-suite of big companies are people. So I believe, like, the typical sort of example I tend to put all the time is like, you know, we think Coca-Cola has a lot of power, right? Because they are a huge company. But if you think about it, why do they have so much power? I think it's because we give it to them. We keep buying Coca-Cola products. So, you know, every time we buy something from them, we're telling them, hey, I give you my money, do with it what you're doing. In this case, if it's like polluting the world or creating health issues, I'm giving you my money for you to continue doing that. So obviously, if I stop buying Coca-Cola, that's not going to change anything now. But if everybody stops buying Coca-Cola, suddenly Coca-Cola will have no power. And obviously, they're clever enough. Before that happens, they will shift their business model and they will adapt to whatever people are demanding. And I think we're seeing this in many industries right now, or there's clear examples of lots of products that stopped using palm oil, for example, because there was a lot of consumer demand and people came together, raised their voices and say, hey, we don't want palm oil in this product. And suddenly, from one day to another, products stopped using it. So I do believe that we, the people, have the power, but sometimes it's a bit difficult to see that we have that power because we have to come together to exercise it, right?
Yeah. It's really interesting you talk about the palm oil thing, because I was in Sweden recently, as you well know, and I was having a conversation with a good friend of ours, a guy called Eric, and interestingly enough, we talked about the palm oil thing, and he's American Swedish, and we were talking about the fact that that was I think the way he put it was the palm oil thing was a byproduct of all the corn that was grown in America, and they ended up with all this palm oil. They weren't really sure what to do with it in the I think it was kind of the 40s and the 50s, and then they found these other uses for it, and they just kind of started selling it and pushing it into all these kind of products, and I think that what resonated with me about that is that it took us a long time from the 40s to get till now to kind of eradicate that problem, and I think what we're talking now, 50, 60, possibly even nearly 70 years in before the people have kind of stood up to that. And I think that's more likely because there wasn't an awareness of how bad it was for people. I think back then probably, the marketing companies do a very good job of telling you how good these products are for you until there's some research to say that they're not. Think tobacco, think all of those kind of things from back in the swinging 50s and 60s back in the States, I suppose. But if that's the case, and I think, and I really like the romance of everything that you're trying to do, but I just wonder, do we have time for that? Do we have time to kind of air these opinions and get people together? And is the time to get all of this stuff done? Because I everywhere I look these days, it just seems like there's another catastrophe, or there's another problem, or there's another big thing that gets brought to the forefront. I just wonder, God, is there enough people to deal with all of this who's got a good enough heart? What do you think about that?
Good question, really good question. In my case, I'm always quite optimistic about it. I think when you just watch the normal news. I mean, I'm lucky because I don't have a TV, so I don't watch the news or like the typical
very
news.
Wise.
It's wise, yeah, because I think most of the stuff you see either in TV or online about news, it tends to be the bad stuff, right? Because that's what grabs people's attention. But for every bad news you see, there's another maybe 5 or 10 good news, but they're just not newsworthy, right? So I try to filter what I receive in terms of news, and there's actually lots of good stuff happening. There's now more money being invested in renewables rather than fossil fuel for the first time in history, and we don't tend to hear about it all the time. We just tend to hear, there's a lot of money being invested in fossil fuels, which is still pretty bad, but at least you can see that there's also hope. There's more money now being pumped into renewables. So I consider myself an optimist, and as you said, do we have time? The answer is probably no, we don't have time. We really need that sense of urgency. We're already late. I think it's now about choosing extinction or just a not that bad consequence, right? So minimizing that negative effect. So we don't have time, we need to act. But I think it's also important, you see online, there's a lot of criticism many times to people who are trying to raise awareness, talk about these issues. And the thing, as you said, is we probably don't have enough change makers. There's lots of them, but we need many more to really make this change happen, right? Yeah. So unless we raise awareness, unless we talk about it with our friends, with our people, everybody, there's not way we're gonna get there. We need to be, in my opinion, taking action, but also talking a lot about it, raising awareness to help inspire others to join as well.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. I think I've got one more question for you. I know we wanted to kind of keep this quite simple today, and I think it's going reasonably well so far. But if I could just drag it back to Born Goods interaction. Our interactions are generally speaking with big corporate companies. So just for your awareness, I think I'll give you a 30-second whistle stop tour of what we do. So we deal with big corporate companies, generally speaking, or anyone actually who's really serious about recycling, refurbishing, and generally speaking getting rid of their IT hardware in the correct manner with all the right certifications, and trying to make sure as much of that as possible doesn't go to landfill, which is a bit of our mantra really. But one of the things I always find is that dealing with corporates especially is that there's so many layers of management, and there's so many layers of people who have their own agendas, who have their own budgets, who have their own goals that they're kind of responsible for in the business. It's not just a one-stop person decision, generally speaking, when it comes to what to do with the waste. And there's a lot of things to do with that, because if you, for example, have an estate of 1,000 laptops and you're going to refresh those, there's a little bit of money in that, and also it can be very, very costly to recycle it, and I think sometimes I find it difficult to get across the green benefits of doing it, which could cost someone money, and a kind of a longer term strategy. And as we all know, I think, these days, and having been in the corporate game for a long, long time myself, the strategy for corporates gets shorter and shorter and shorter, i.e. whenever the next general shareholder meeting is. And I find that really hard sometimes, that on the face of it, they write these big these big annual reports, and they all say they're going to adhere to this, they're going to adhere to that. But actually, when you go and speak to the people who work in these businesses, they're under so much pressure to have certain goals and to abide by certain budgets. Usually, when it comes to the green stuff, there's not a lot of money left over to kind of implement these programs. What do you think about that? If there's do you have any experience with that, first of all, or do you see that yourself?
Yeah. I mean, and I should have said before, but I'm a big fan of what you do. I think it's so much needed, because we really have a big issue with technology waste, right? And I think they released the circularity report last week or the week before. Don't quote me on it, but I think they said we're only 7% circular at the moment, and it's a pretty low number. So there's a lot we can do, like you're doing, to bring those products back into life or recycle them in a proper way. But you're right. I think corporates have that challenge, that it's like they now see the pressure of needing to balance sustainability with profits and with people, right? So we now see how the triple bottom line is becoming more real. But they have this challenge of how can we get the profits and still get money to invest in sustainability and everything else. And it's definitely it's a tricky one. It's not an easy one to solve. There's so many people now, advancing in the ESG space and trying to help companies advancing in that sector. But it's not easy. And I also posted recently a question saying something like, if you were the CEO of a big fossil fuel company or any other company, would you shut it off tomorrow? And it's actually not that simple, right? Because there's a lot of implications around that. So I think that sometimes we tend to criminalize and put big corporates as the bad guy. But I think it's important to also empathize with them and thinking, okay, it's a complex issue. So rather than just say you are the bad guy, how can we work with you to help you solve this problem?
Yeah. I think I've seen it, I can't remember who the quote was from. I consume so much information on this topic now, it's hard to remember who said what and who did what. But I think if all of the corporates in industries that had a negative effect on the planet just by the nature of their operation were to shut down tomorrow, that would be an economic crisis of which we'd never recover from again worldwide. So I think taking that into, and that was someone who was in sustainability who kind of believes that we should be doing the right things, and I think it's obvious to me that will be the case anyway. So I think it's a hugely complicated problem. I think, and actually, that question we talked about earlier, I was thinking about that because I think I gave a very doomsday answer to your question, I think, online, when I said I think what we need is a big catastrophe worldwide to bring everyone together to kind of realise that we have to do something about it quickly. But I think
something
more and
like
more, since I've reflected on your question, I think I'd probably say the corporates have probably got the biggest responsibility in my view now. I think they're the ones who do the most damage, let's say, and I don't want to be too harsh there either, because these are industries that popped up before we knew what the damage was we were doing, and it's a bit of a snowball effect. But at the same time, I think there's so many corporates. Apple, for instance, is a big player in that market. They just churn out phones after phone after phone after phone, and I think there's some huge big companies that if they did get their heads together, and even if they reduced some of the things they did by a small percentage, would have a huge effect on what they're doing, but they just don't seem to be willing for whatever reason now. So I think my answer is corporates, and I think we're trying to certainly lobby all of the corporates that we deal with to make sure that they buy refurbished kit and things like that. And again, that's another issue, because the IT directors in businesses want brand new stuff, right? They want new toys to play with, and they're not necessarily that interested in the sustainability piece. And then there's the budget people who hold the budget to say, well, you're going to have to buy refurbished because that's all the money you've got to buy with, right? And then the IT director comes back and says, well, can we have a discount and get some new stuff? Maybe it's not the best spec, and So it's a real hard slog sometimes, you know. But
Yeah.
listen, I wanted to finish on one last thing. So I just wanted to say, if you had one thing that you think Good Ripple could change very, very quickly across the globe, what would that be and why?
Good
Put you on
question.
the spot a bit,
Yeah. To be honest, I think it would be really maximizing collaboration. I think right now we're working still too much in silos, and Good Ripple could help people come together, raise their voices and collaborate like we've never collaborated before in human history. Like bring, 8 billion people together and say, hey, we want to do things properly. Let's do it. We've got the technology, we've got the resources. We just need to all come together and agree. So I think that would be the number one thing Good Ripple could do.
Brilliant. Carlos, listen, I'll keep it to our half an hour that we had scheduled. You're a busy guy. I think what you're doing is amazing. Keep up the good work. And if Born Good and Rebuy can help out in any way, you just let us know. We'll definitely be taking that baton on alongside you. So let's stay in touch and all the best with everything. Thanks, Carlos.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Geoff, so much. And yeah, keep up the great work. I think we need to collaborate more in the future. Take care.
Perfect. Thanks, Carlos. Take care, man. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.